host, Randy.
Hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Appetite for Discussion. We have a very special guest on today he's actually a local North Carolinian, and he has he has lived an extraordinary life and has some fantastic life stories and tales, and is actually a true inspiration. But I can't tell his story better than he can. So, everyone, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Charlie Engle. Charlie, you there?
Hey, Brandon, what's going on? I am. Yeah. Thanks for having me, dude. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks
Oh,
so much.
thank you so much. I truly appreciate you coming on the show and telling your story. You are a unique human being with a story to tell, and you with your book and your accomplishments and your ups and your downs, and hopefully your story today will help shine some light on some folks out there who are battling with addiction, or families who know someone who's battling a loved one that has an addiction or mental health problem, and that's something that we need to raise more awareness about, and not push it away to the side, but to talk about it.
Yeah. Well, everybody that's listening. Everybody knows somebody. Everybody either is an addict or knows an addict or has been affected by an addict or alcoholic in their life, because it's inescapable in today's society. And and the hardest thing to know is what to do about it, and how to handle it, and whether you should take action, whether you should do nothing. And it's a very there's no right answer. There's no perfect right answer, that's for sure. And but it is something that I think affects everybody.
Agreed. And so, Charlie, with you grew up here in North Carolina. Could you tell us a little bit about that, and maybe even your childhood?
Yeah, so I was born in a little town called Albemarle, just outside of Charlotte, and my parents were both 18, 19 years old, and college students, and certainly not prepared for me. That's for sure. Not prepared for much, really. And they didn't stay married very long. And my mother was, pretty much set out to save the world. She was as I like to say, a lifelong social worker, even though that was never her actual job. But she was a writer and a theater person and actress, and just very much in that community. And my father ended up joining the Army and going off to Germany for years. And, and this all of that was fairly normal. There wasn't anything all that abnormal. My dad lived in California and my mom was in North Carolina. And so I did do a lot of kind of back and forth through the years, and ultimately moved in with my dad when I was a teenager. And, and that was out in California. And that's when I really started playing sports and running and doing a lot of that. And I didn't, my high school was kind of that typical overachiever high school. I had a very demanding dad who, he had his own problems with alcohol. And so I grew up in that atmosphere of never knowing who I was going to come home to. Which version of my dad I was going to be talking to. And consequently, I made sure that I stayed really busy and I wasn't in the house very much. And so I was the, captain of all the teams and the student body president. And, I kind of did everything I could in high school to stand out in a positive way, and mostly to get my dad's attention. And of course, as a lot of people understand, that's not how it works. So,
No.
the harder I tried, the less effective it seemed to be. And ultimately, I left for UNC Chapel Hill as a 17-year-old freshman And that's where things really got interesting.
Now you went to Chapel Hill, but you actually an interesting part about that is I read your book, which is a fascinating
Yeah.
read, and I'm this is for the YouTube for people at home who can see. Here's his book, Running Man, and I encourage everyone to pick a copy of this up and read it. It's an easy read, but it's very informative and it's fun. There's a lot of funny stuff in there too. And while reading your book, there's I saw a lot of similarities in kind of my story and yours. Not the addiction part, but just local stuff and being a Tar Heel fan. And you actually played basketball for Roy Williams for a short spell. Is that right?
Crazy, right? And I was there,
A little
and I was there at a great time, and it is interesting. I mean, I think people will. The very brief version of my college career, though, is that I went to school with all those sort of accolades, and I think I thought that maybe there would be a banner on the dorm, saying "Welcome, Charlie," because they would have all heard about me, and I was just that awesome. And then, of course, I get there, and what I figure out pretty quickly is that I'm actually quite average, and all these freshmen coming to Carolina also have really amazing resumes, and they've accomplished so much. And I got kind of lost, and what's funny is I actually went to Carolina. I mean, I went for a lot of reasons, but another reason was I thought I was going to go and play football, which is crazy if you look at that never even came close to materializing, and I decided on a whim just to go out for the basketball team.
Mm-hmm.
And Dean Smith in his first couple of years of coaching and way back when, and I just decided for the hell of it to go out for basketball, and I knew it was almost one in a million would probably be generous, and of course I did not make the varsity team, but I did make the JV team. And Roy Williams was the coach back then, because he was actually the last coach on the bench. And I had the good fortune to be there in the early 80s. So a few guys most people have heard of, Michael Jordan and James Worthy and Sam Perkins, were all there. And, and I got a chance to be on the court with those guys, a few days a week, every week for a couple of years.
It's actually probably fair to say that you helped Michael achieve some of his greatness while he had to practice against you and your defense.
I think that's incredibly fair, and thank you for pointing that out. So many people have overlooked my contribution to Michael's career, and I thank you so much for setting the record straight.
Well, that's what I'm here to do.
Those times he dunked over me, I think they helped his self-esteem, and it really, it made a big difference in how he moved forward in his career.
Hey, someone has to do it. Now, so you tried to play football. What position did you play in football?
Yes, I was a quarterback in high school at Pinecrest High School in Southern Pines, North Carolina.
Yeah.
And not a very good. I was a slow-footed, decent passer on a really, really bad team, and so consequently, I spent 3 years basically running away from people because it was a difficult place to be. And my junior year, though, I did have it's funny, I don't think I even wrote about this in the book, but I was talking about it recently. I think this probably speaks to my endurance and maybe stubbornness. But in my junior year in high school, I went the entire season without ever leaving the field.
Oh, wow.
So I was the kicker and the punter, and I played offense and defense. And so I actually went the entire season without ever stepping foot off the field for a play. Like, I was on the field every play of every game that season, and nobody had ever done that before. And and that was just the way it was. I don't know how good I was, but I was stubborn enough to be out there all the time. And so I got recruited by Clemson and a few other schools to play. I mean, nobody was offering me a scholarship, that's for sure. But I was offered the opportunity at a few schools, and Carolina being one of them, to walk on. And, with a pretty good chance of earning a scholarship. And I was also, like I said, a kicker and a punter. And that was probably the place I had the best chance of actually making the team. And it just never happened.
But that didn't happen. But you actually have some family lineage with running at Carolina, right?
I do indeed. Yeah, and this is funny. I think this is important for this talk. My grandfather was the head coach, track and cross country at Carolina for, about 40 years. And he was a track star and cross country star back in the 20s when he was in school at Carolina. And pretty shortly thereafter, he became the coach, and he coached all the way to the early 60s when he actually died. So he died when I was about a year old. And so I never really got to know him, but the way families will do, from a legacy standpoint, my family would say, "Oh, you're going to be a runner, just like your grandfather." And I think kids hear that kind of thing. And I liked it. I liked the way it sounded. And, and I figured out that I did enjoy running. I didn't run on a team when I was young, but I enjoyed it. And I kept that thought in my head through the years. So when I was there at school, if we all had crystal balls, we'd go back and maybe change a few things. But if I could change one thing, I would actually have run track in college, because I could have made the team. I wouldn't have been probably a star runner or anything, but I could have made the team. And I don't know. I'm a recovering addict, and I think I was probably always destined for addiction to play a big role in my life. But I sure would have liked to have done it a little bit differently.
That was going to be a question I was going to ask earlier. If there's one thing you could change, what would it be? And that was a good answer, I think. Because you never know. But it's one of those things where learning a little bit about you and doing some research and reading your book, running has obviously been something that's been there for your life, even when you were like, I think, 10 or 12 years old and you ran a mile in 5 or 6 minutes or whatever your goal was, and then running in college, and then, what you're doing now, especially. But so when you were in college, when did you really fall into drugs and alcohol? Was it in high school or college, or how did that
Yeah, it
happen?
was really college. I went to I got through high school, drinking a few beers, and I probably smoked pot a couple times, but I never liked the way pot made me feel. And so, again, when I got to Carolina, I felt a little lost. And what I figured out, quite frankly, very quickly, was that I may not be a star athlete or student, but I was a first string, all-American drinker. And, I'd have been on anybody's, team, if there was such a thing. And I mean, it sounds, I do make light of things, and I don't want anybody listening to think that I'm making fun of addiction or alcoholism. But the fact of the matter is, addicts and alcoholics do a lot of really stupid things, and I'm included in that. And if I didn't laugh at some of the things, I don't know where else I would put it.
For sure.
And so, I developed this reputation as being a really, like, I could drink more than anybody else. I just could. And that speaks to my lineage, my heritage. I was a fourth generation, alcoholic. I mean, I wasn't necessarily an alcoholic at that point, but my behavior, unbeknownst to me, certainly showed the signs of trouble coming down the road.
Yeah.
And so I just became that guy that drank. Every night there was somewhere to go to or something to do, which in college is pretty much every night. I was there. And my second year in school, I ended up joining a fraternity, and because obviously that was going to help.
Of course.
And it's funny too. A little history. The drinking age in 1980 when I went to school in North Carolina was actually still 18 for beer and wine. So I was not drinking illegally. And I stayed just ahead of the curve, because while I was in school, they did change the law to 21, but it didn't affect me because I stayed just ahead of it. And, the 80s were known all around the country, really, as sort of the cocaine decade.
And sure. I mean, there's documentaries about it.
Absolutely. I mean, it's still around today, but in the 80s, it was just ubiquitous. I mean, it was almost like weed, what weed might be on campus these days. You know, it was not, you'd never be surprised to see somebody with cocaine and whatever. And as you read in the book, when I first tried it, I wasn't actually impressed. And I actually, my joke even was that I was relieved that cocaine wasn't going to be interfering with my drinking, because I had a pretty good, routine
That's right.
with my drink, and I knew how to handle drinking. I'm not saying I handled it well, but I knew what to expect, and there was comfort in that. And then the second time I tried cocaine, everything changed, and it became, as I like to say, we spend our lives sort of chasing first experiences. And although technically that was my second one in that case, it was the first time it ever really affected me. And it was like, okay, now I get it. I get what this is all about. This makes me feel great. And, and I spent the next 10 years basically chasing after that same feeling and never really finding it again, and in college, I became that guy that when a lot of my friends were partiers too, but, they would stop at 2 o'clock in the morning or 3 if they had classes the next day, and they would get their homework done, and they would still do the things that they were there to do. And eventually with me, I became incapable of maintaining all of those other things while basically, being a early on drug addict.
Right. And when you were saying chasing that first, well, your second try at it, but is it one of those things too that when you were in the process of doing the drugs, it made you feel euphoric or even motivated, and you were getting things done, or was it just
Totally.
What was the feeling like? Like, what was the thing that? Sure, it was chasing.
Yeah,
the high,
no,
but
I
there
mean,
had to be something else in there too, right?
I felt like all powerful, when I did coke. I felt like, I was gonna, I was gonna be a great student. I was gonna get past all these challenges. I was gonna I think there's a funny paragraph in the book where I talk about, I was gonna save the whales. I was gonna, cure cancer. I was gonna because again, cocaine makes you feel like anything is possible. And so it goes so far beyond just straight out euphoria. It hits a pleasure center in the brain that makes everything seem possible. And of course it's well known that it's very short lived, and that doesn't last. And you've got to keep feeding that, that monster to continue that feeling. And basically that's impossible. You just can't. And
Right.
So eventually and inevitably, things fall apart. And they did for me basically at the beginning of my senior year in college. I stopped going to class. I stayed in school, but I just stopped going. And so I had a semester basically where I was in school but not in school. And I knew, the way something is inevitable, whatever that might be. I knew that this wasn't sustainable. It wasn't going to last forever. And, by the end of that semester, I actually had a friend, a fraternity brother, call my father. I mean, and just think about it. I always tell people to try to think about whether you would do this or not. And basically he called my father and said, look, Charlie's in trouble. He's not going to class, and he's staying out all night and sometimes for days at a time. And I think he's either going to end up dead or in jail. And, again, I've thanked that friend of mine many times. And, it was I can't imagine what he went through in trying to figure out whether or not to make that call.
Absolutely. I mean, he had to be torn. What do you do? Do you, feel like you're ratting out your buddy, or are you trying to save him?
Yeah. Yeah, because I was pissed.
Sure. Oh, I bet so. He's ruining your body.
When I found out, I was pissed. Although honestly, even looking back, there was a part of me that knew that, this was, this was unsustainable. It couldn't continue. So my father actually came to he was living in Seattle at the time. He and my stepmom had moved out there, and I moved to Seattle, and that began, Brandon, this long period of time, this 10-year period of time where a very predictable pattern happened. I would move to a new place. I would get a job, whatever that was. I would actually be the best at whatever it was I was doing. Most of my jobs were sales jobs. So I would work at a fitness club, or I sold cars. And like I wouldn't just be like the top salesman in the club. I would be the top salesman in the whole, fitness chain. And I wouldn't be just the top Toyota salesman at my dealership. I was the top salesman in the country. And
so you've always had the ability to achieve and be pretty much the best at whatever environment you're in, even if it's in your local high school football, or if it's the drinking team, so to speak. Or if you're selling cars, right?
Totally. And I think a lot of that had to do with just my need to overachieve, because my attitude was, if I could do those things, surely I couldn't be an addict. Like addicts don't lead the company in sales, and addicts don't buy a house and buy a car and get married and do all these things. And so it was almost like my mission was to balance my bad behavior with overachieving on the other side, so that, my joke was always that the boss can't fire the top salesman. And that turned out not to be true. Because, eventually I became a pain in the ass, everywhere I went, because I wouldn't show up for work, and I wouldn't, it was unsustainable. That should be the name of my next book, is Unsustainable, because it's not a behavior that can work in the long term. So I did what we commonly call in addiction recovery, I did a series of geographic changes, and as if the change in geography would change the outcome. And so I wasn't working on myself. I was working on what I saw as the circumstances that led to my behavior. If only the boss would pay more attention to me, if only, my wife would do this, if only my father would do this.
Right. It was everyone.
Then everything would be okay.
Sure.
Exactly.
It's
and so if I just moved, and sure. No, of course not. I mean, deep down, of course, I knew, again, in the book, I talk about going to my first AA meeting in Atlanta in my early to mid 20s. And, I sat in a room at Grady Hospital, which is it's kind of the poor people's hospital in downtown Atlanta. Mm-hmm. And I looked around at a bunch of people, and I was shocked to find out that I was sitting in a room with people who were actually trying to quit drinking and quit doing drugs. I mean, I was there to figure out how to moderate my drug use, and how to just live and not always go off the deep end. And I still didn't get it. And it took me 5 or 6 years after that first meeting to finally find my way to a place where I was in recovery, because I wanted to be there, because I needed to be there, rather than because my boss wanted me to be there, or my wife wanted me to be there, or other people wanted me to go.
And don't you feel like, well, in my experiences with that is, people have to, like you said, you have to be there for you. Your father could want you, your mother could want you to be there, but if you don't want to be there, it's really not gonna work. If it's not there for the right reasons, it has to be you who wants to be there.
Right. And I mean, look, it takes what it takes. And a lot of times people get into recovery, as we all know, because they have legal problems, or whatever it might be. But those legal problems can't give you the heart to to make the decision that you want to change your life. They can give you a push towards recovery, but at some point, like sitting in a meeting or whatever, if that switch doesn't flip over and say, okay, I get it. Like, I'm here because I actually want to change my life, Not I'm here because I want to save my marriage, or I'm here because I want to save my job, or whatever it might be. Because those reasons, look, and I'm not saying, plenty of people have found their way to long-term sobriety because they want to save their marriage or their job. So I'm not saying that that's an impossible route, but I do think that it's harder. Like in a way, as we say in recovery, step one is basically, admitting that you have a problem, as we all know, and those first four steps, basically getting to a place where we're willing, to turn our lives over to some higher power, whatever that means to that person, and find a way to say, I don't want to live like this anymore. And not because it's going to save, my marriage or my job or my family, my kids, anything else, but just because it's going to save me. It's going to actually make me a fully formed human being, that's capable of making a real contribution on this planet, other than just not drinking. Not drinking and not doing drugs is not the goal, ultimately. Everybody thinks it is right off, but the goal is learning how to actually live in this very difficult world, because we all know that life is hard, and just quitting drinking doesn't all of a sudden make it easy.
There's a good quote in the book that you talk about, and we'll get into some of the extreme things that you've accomplished. But one of the quotes that stood out to me, I think, was, and I'm probably going to butcher this, but like, the hardest thing of everything you've done, of them all, is the fight getting sober, but it's the war staying sober.
Yeah, totally. No, absolutely. I mean, that's what matters. Getting sober in a lot of ways is easy because it usually comes right after some traumatic experience.
Sure.
Like, people don't just all of a sudden wake up one day and say, man, my life is fantastic and everything is wonderful, and I just got a big promotion and I married a supermodel. I think I'm going to quit drinking.
Yeah. Or I'm going to go spend $1,000 a day for 5 days on crack.
Yeah. Yeah, because that'll be good for me.
That's logical.
Right. What they have is life's pressures and unhappiness, and you take that and you put it on top of a person who maybe is genetically predisposed to addiction or that kind of behavior, and it very quickly snowballs out of control. And and I think this is an important thing to say. So I know we're meandering around, and I love this kind of conversation, but there's things that I want to make sure I say, because maybe it'll help somebody else understand, if not for themselves, for their loved one that they're trying to help. You can't make anybody else do it. Like, you just can't. Like, that person has to finally come to a realization, no matter how many threats happen or whatever, where they actually realize they want to make a change for themselves. That's number one. And I'm not saying that you don't push that, but anybody who's tried for years to like push somebody into recovery or encourage them to quit drinking or doing drugs understands the frustration and the lack of logic involved as you're watching this person's life fall apart and their health fall apart, and you can't fathom why they don't want to change.
Absolutely.
Like, it just seems it's unexplainable. Like, it is unexplainable, and to try to put logic to it is just a waste of time, frankly. So what you have to do for that person, and that sounds like I'm giving advice. I don't give advice because I have no idea what to do. I don't have the magic formula. I know for me, no one could force me into sobriety. And it wasn't until, the birth of my first son actually brought about a change in me, because I thought he was going to be my savior. Like, I thought just by the mere fact that he was born, that was going to make me, because I knew I didn't want him to grow up in a household like I grew up in with my father. I thought that was going to change everything, and I felt love and from him and for him that I never knew that I had, because I thought as an addict I was just broken and somehow not deserving of that kind of love. And so when he was born, I've had all these feelings, and finally, for the first time ever in my adult life, at 29 years old, I was like, I've got hope. I've got strength. I've got this. I was determined. And, 2 months later, inexplicably, there I am on my way to the hood where I spend, 6 days smoking crack. And, that binge ends with me sitting on the ground watching the police go through my car. And there's bullet holes in the car put there by somebody who was, shooting at me. And, in that crazy moment. And I mean, I watched the police search my car, and I'll never forget watching this policeman reach under the driver's seat and pull out a crack pipe and like turn around and look at me and shake his head. And any even remotely rational person would have been thinking about how much trouble they were in. And all I could think was, so that's where that was.
That's where that was.
Because I've been looking for it.
That's a part of the book. I said earlier there's some similarities, not in me and my addiction, but that exact scenario that you talk about in the book and now reminds me, of my dad when he would disappear for, I'm getting ready to get married. Unfortunately, he falls off the wagon. It's almost like when good things are happening or positive momentum happens, it's almost like a slip, which always made me nervous. We have 2-year-old twins now, and he slips, and it's almost like now that something good and positive is happening, and we got that family unit, there's this big backslide. And you're right. It's so for me the most frustrating and sad part is he is now going to miss out forever on them growing up, but he was missing such crucial moments in their life, and he's missing out on their walking and them opening Christmas presents, and that was just a deep sadness for myself that I see that he's not going to get to experience. And
right.
There's a bit of guilt, like you said earlier, that the family feels like there's more that we can do. Well, if we would have just done this, or excuse me, if there had been a bit more tough love, or maybe a bit more softness. But I go to grievance counseling because I think it helps, and you have to do something with that, and I try to put this into positive energy and forces, and not push it down in a negative way, because that could very well happen. But it's good to get out there, and it's good to talk about it. But if that needs to be channeled in a positive direction, but it's hard when you have a family member and you lose them to that addiction. We've been battling his for 30 years, that you felt like you could have done more, even though, like you said, you can't do it. The family can't do it. That person has to do it. And it's just sad that there's people today, and even right now, the drugs are more important to them at the moment, and it's that addiction. It's not that they don't love their family or their grandkids or their wife or whatnot, but that addiction has a strong hold on them. It's so powerful.
Yeah, well, people take it personally too, and I understand they take it personally because it is personal. But I do also, and I know, well, I shouldn't put words in your mouth, but my suspicion is that you see this, and that is that, like, if that person in your life, had cancer and couldn't make it to your wedding, like, you would forgive them. Like, you wouldn't. It would be a sad moment, and everybody would try to figure it out, and because obviously nobody chooses to get cancer. Right. And with addiction, it feels like the person in question has made a choice and a decision to do these things, but it's not really the case. An addict is an addict, and they literally are, generally speaking, born that way, and that is not. It's complicated because that's not a reason to excuse behavior.
Right.
That's not what I'm implying at all. But there's if people could approach the addict with a little more compassion and a little more understanding, and also there has to be that tough love. It can't always be enabling behavior. You can't always get that person out of jail or give them more money or solve their problems for them, because that also doesn't help. And as I said to you, when I was sitting on the ground watching the police go through my car, I had been awake for 6 straight days at that point without a minute of sleep. I hadn't eaten. I was a disaster. And I had the clearest like thought come into my mind that I had ever had. And that was, simply that, Brett, my son, can't save me.
Mhm.
Like, nobody's coming to save me. Like, I need to find a way to save myself. And it was the first time ever that I finally understood that this, this can't, my sobriety can't be more important to other people than it is to me, or I'm never going to succeed.
Right.
And, and look, that night I went to an AA meeting, and the next morning I got up and I put my running shoes on. I went for a run. And, for the next 3 straight years, without missing a single day, I did those 2 things every single day without missing a day. And I changed, and I slowly began to change my life. And I thought, and I think this is an important point, I thought during those 3 years that what I was trying to do, like I ran 30 marathons in those 3 years because as I jokingly say, because obviously I had that whole addiction thing under control, I did become addicted to running to a degree. And what I thought was that I needed to like surgically remove my addict. And if I just ran hard enough, if I just did all this sobriety stuff perfectly, that I could get rid of that person lurking inside there. And it took me those 3 years to understand that my addict and my addictive nature is all the best parts of me. And without that part of my personality in there, I probably would never have been successful at anything. And so it's not about eliminating the addict, because those, look, anybody you've ever known that's good at something, has mastered something, is good at work, there's a certain level of obsession that goes with that, right? I mean, you have to have passion and a certain level of obsession to actually achieve much of any greatness in this world. And that's because what that person has managed to do is take that passion and that desire and their skill and point it towards something positive.
You're so fortunate and blessed to be able to have seen that in yourself and realize that, to take it and turn it, like you said, to that passion into something positive, into something better. I think there's a lot of people out there who are addicts who see that addiction as a negative, and they haven't been able to turn that switch, maybe like you did, and to push it into something positive, and they only see it as a negative, because I've heard other people say, well, I'm just an addict, or I'm an addict, but you, on the other hand, you say it with, even in your voice, I'm an addict, it's like, it's an upbeat. It's like, that's not a bad thing, because I've taken that addiction and I put it towards positivity, something that's motivating and something good.
Yes, absolutely. And that is, a lot of people don't survive long enough to actually get to that place, right?
Right.
It's just complicated. The people who are gone, who have left us due to addiction, they no longer have the ability to tell their story, and they no longer have the ability to explain, what happened, because it all seems like, misery and so forth.
I feel like it almost pushes
that's
them,
not,
even if they're still here, it maybe even pushes them down to a more of like a depression, I'm just an addict, I'm an addict. And they almost beat themselves down with those words instead of, choosing to look at it in a different light like you have.
Yes. No, exactly. And I mean, look, and I get to sound, I don't know if I sound smart or not, but I get to sound wise and smart and all of that. And that's because I've lived long enough to, to have some perspective on addiction and what it takes, to get into recovery. And I think, look, I mean, it colors everything that I do today. It has, as my story, I went on to become, maybe the top, at least for a few years, the top ultra runner in the world for a little while. That's a hard thing to actually quantify, but some would argue that, and I was running distances of hundreds and even thousands of miles at a time. And that also was, it's addictive behavior of a sort. And I would have people, some of them well-meaning, some of them not, quite frankly, come up to me and say, haven't you just switched addictions? And I had to really think hard about it and give consideration to what they were saying. And the fact is, what I figured out was this: addiction is all about being invisible, and addiction is about hiding and about having no feelings. And if I had a feeling when I was an addict, when I was a using addict, if I had a feeling, I would drink it away or drug it away. Like, I didn't have the ability to deal with feelings, good or bad. And running is the exact opposite. Like, when I go out and I run 10 miles or 100 miles or 1,000 miles, like, there's no hiding. There's nowhere to hide. You feel absolutely everything. So running forces me, in fact, to be fully present all the time, when I'm doing it, for good things and for bad things. Like, whatever's going on, I've got to be fully present for that.
There's another part in a quote in your book, and I'm going to try not to butcher it, but you saying that brings it to my mind. There's a part, I think you say, like, I love the feeling of being raw more than anything. I think that was,
Yeah.
I can't remember. It might have been when you were in prison for your run that you did there. And I want to get to that for sure. But that stood out to me. It's almost like that rawness, that exposure, even the suffering part of it. You want to feel that because you were so numb for a while.
Yes. No, it's exactly right. I mean, and look, man, part of it is, you're being polite when you say raw, in a way. I mean, raw is what I wanted to feel, but quite frankly, I also felt like I needed to be punished. Like, there was some aspect of self-punishment going on also. Because look, addicts aren't immune. It seems sometimes like a using addict is immune to having any guilt or whatever. But the fact is, if we spent a lot of time feeling super guilty about the things we were doing, it would, like, that damage would be too hard to live with. And I'm sorry to actually say this, like, out loud, because it will affect some people, listening to this thing. But that guilt causes people to, kill themselves, and that guilt causes, and that's not anybody else's fault. That's on the addict, the user. It's not on anybody else. We've all said harmful things to, angry things to that person that we're frustrated with. What the hell is wrong with you?
Oh, yeah.
And, like, why can't you just do this? And, don't you care about this? And, like, all those things, and the addict hears all those things. And it's not to say that the person saying them isn't right. And it's just, and that, the one saying those things shouldn't, like, carry that guilt around in their lives if heaven forbid something tragic happens to that person that you're trying to help. But look, that all boils back down to the fact that, you can't save anybody that doesn't want to be saved, that can't, they have to take the first step for themselves. Then the hardest thing for the person who's supporting that person to do is to find that place in their heart to love and support them. And I didn't use the word trust them.
Right. That's hard.
Because it's hard. All of a sudden, a month or 2 months into clean and sober, you want to hand over the car keys, and, oh yeah, we're leaving for the weekend. Could you watch the house? Like, you want to do all those things because you want to trust them on one hand, but that's, every situation is different. And that, it takes a while for that recovering addict to figure out who they are and what they want to do. And I can tell you this, if they're not working a program of some type, it's a dangerous situation. And by that, I mean, just stopping drinking doesn't change, that may change the outward behavior, but if they're not getting some kind of therapy or going to AA meetings or some kind of meetings, or running, or finding, or even going to church, whatever that person needs to find. For me, it took two things. I needed AA meetings and I needed running. And what I found in both of those places more than anything else was fellowship. Like, I needed to not feel alone. Could I have just quit drinking and quit doing drugs and never done it again? I mean, maybe I could have done that. But what would that have changed in me? How would I have been different as a person internally just by changing those things?
Right.
What I needed was to be around other people who had gone through those changes before me and got a sense of what they got out of it and how they grew as people. And I learned that through the recovery community and the running community. And we have a saying, it's attraction rather than promotion. So I was always turned off by people who told me that I needed to do a certain thing, because that was, I think, my, that was my stubbornness, frankly, my screw you attitude. Like, you don't know me. You don't know what's good for me. That was my combative attitude. But if I watched you and I saw how running made your life better, or I watched you and I saw how going to AA meetings, like all of a sudden the bill collectors weren't knocking on your door, your parents weren't yelling at you, your girlfriend was still around, like you had a car to drive, you had people that were nice to you. Like, who wouldn't want those things over what most addicts have? So by just being around people who were living a better life than me, I suddenly realized I want that life. I don't want this crappy life that I've been leading. I want some of that.
And how did all of that come together and then lead you to the ultra marathon running and the extreme adventures that you went on all over the globe, which they're in the book, and I know we're not going to be able to get into all of those, and everyone should read it because you really can't believe it. Like, some of the shit that you did and you experienced, like on a glacier and riding a camel and running, through deserts. It's really, it's honestly a bit insane. It's fun to read, and you shake your head and go, "Is this shit real? Like, seriously?"
Yeah.
And it is real.
Yeah.
So how did you get to there?
Yeah, well, you know what? And it boils. Thanks for asking that question, because I do think this is important. Some people, even so, people who finally get sober, what they crave is normalcy. They want a normal life. And for me, I really just never was interested in that. And I'm not saying everybody would do. I'm not saying everybody would, but here's the basic lesson in it. Like, I took all those lessons from 10 years of hardcore drug addiction, and I understood that I learned a lot during that time. Now, a lot of it is stuff that nobody, you kind of, you never want to learn those lessons, but I learned a lot. And what I learned that was that everything that shaped who I am today was based in the hard lessons learned during addiction. So I took that in running and adventure, and I transferred the same idea. And it's simply this: there's nothing to be gained from seeking a comfortable life. Like, what lesson did comfort ever teach? You don't get to the end of your story, whatever your story is, and if somebody were to ask you, what were the things that really shaped your life? I would put everything that I have on the line and say that person would answer the question by describing the hardships that they faced in their lives. Nobody answers that question by saying, you know what, my life was just so easy and I really never had any problems, and like, that's what made me who I am today.
Right.
What they say is, that time I had cancer, or that time my husband left me, or that time when my kids got in an accident, whatever it might be. They describe hardship after hardship. So if you transfer that into running and into adventure, what I did was simply choose my suffering. Like, I understood that if I put myself in difficult physical situations, it was nothing like I experienced when I was an addict. Like running 100 miles is child's play compared to what it felt like to be an alcoholic and a drug addict. That is suffering. That is true and genuine suffering with no end in sight. Like, I was able to enter, marathons and 100-milers and even make decisions to run across the Sahara Desert because I knew it was a calculated risk. And what I was seeking was actually the desire to reach a place where I wanted to quit, like where the pain was so bad. And I don't mean physical pain, emotional pain. Like, I became, in 100 miles, you will become uncertain of your ability to finish. I don't care who you are.
Right.
And I craved having that feeling and then finding a way to dig a little bit deeper and get past it. Because I knew that if I could get past that feeling of wanting to quit, if I just understood logically in my brain, despite the physical pain I might be experiencing at that moment, that if I could find a way to push beyond that, I would come out of this experience a better, stronger person.
I feel like
and so what I like to say...
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I feel like there's only a few people that I listen to a lot of podcasts and read books, and well, not a lot of books. I don't want to sound like I'm smart because I can barely put two sentences together. But it reminds me too of like David Goggins and his story of struggle and extreme and pushing through. And when you get to where you feel like you're at that mental exhaustion, you're going to break, he finds another gear and you find another gear. Like, I feel like if you do y'all know each other or have y'all met?
We do. Yeah, we know each other well.
Man, I feel like if you guys ever teamed up on a mission, someone may die and on some extreme event because you guys aren't going to stop. But you guys are very inspirational to people, and I appreciate what you guys are doing because I did a tiny little run with a friend of ours that we have a mutual friend named Drew Combs, and he has a run here in Statesville, the Halloween Hobble. And I ran a whopping 4 miles. I know, brace yourselves, last fall. But for me, that was a lot. I don't run. So this year, I'm going to challenge myself in the same event, and I'm going to try to run 6 hours, and try to finish. And my goal is to run maybe 20 miles.
Okay, so wait, though. You said you ran 4 miles or 4 hours?
I ran 4 miles, which is like you tying your shoes.
All right.
But this coming fall, I'm going to try to run the 6 hours straight. Putting myself in the, being comfortable with the uncomfortable. So I'm trying to learn and broaden my own horizons and challenge myself in certain things as well. But you are a part of that reason, reading your book and listening to some of your stories. And same thing with David Goggins, listening to his speeches, reading his book. And, those things are inspirational. And people are out there, a lot of people are listening to what you guys are saying and taking it serious and applying it too. That's different than just hearing it, but actually applying it.
Absolutely. And and again, I think that people, look, man, just like what you're doing right there. And I know Drew, of course, and Drew's an awesome guy and he's got a great perspective on recovery too. And, you making the commitment and saying it out loud right here that you're going to run for 6 hours, what I encourage you to say to yourself too is that your commitment is to be on your feet for 6 hours, whatever form that takes. Running, walking, crawling. I guess crawling isn't technically on your feet, but you know what I mean.
Right.
That's your commitment, that you're going to be out there for 6 hours. Because look, no matter how bad it feels, I know already you can keep moving for 6 hours and you will do that. And the goal is to find some enlightenment. And people expect, because we're an expectant society, right? They expect that it's going to be like a lightning bolt and like magically halfway through, you're going to have this epiphany that's going to change your life. That's not how this works. At least it's not how it works for me. The way it works for me is I'll go do that 6 hours and I'll get through it. And, I'm like anybody else. At some point during that 6 hours, I'm going to be saying to myself, what in the hell was I thinking? Why am I doing this? Like, why did I think this was a good idea? All those, I'm not special. All those things are going to pass through my mind, but I'm going to keep moving and I'm going to find a way to keep moving. And it's because what I know is the payoff will come later.
Yeah.
In the short term, I'm going to feel great when I'm done. Like at 6 hours, I'm going to be relieved. I'm going to shower and eat, and I'm going to feel that endorphin release that I used to only get through drugs. I'm going to feel that endorphin release in my body, and I'm going to feel satisfaction. But then it's going to take a few hours, a few days, a few weeks to gain perspective on what I just did. And that will help give me understanding of what I got out of the experience. And it may not be just one thing. You know, I know I'm talking a lot, but I want to say this one other thing. Running is such a funny thing because you don't have to run. You can do something else. But people come up to me all the time and they say, you know, I'd really like to run, but I hate running.
I get it.
And I always laugh and I say, well, the first thing, you know, you might want to consider is changing your mental approach. Because if you went into your job every day and said how much you hated it, or you woke up every day and looked across at your partner and thought, man, I hate this person. You know, that's a pretty, and a lot of people do that, you know, and that's a pretty
honey?
lousy.
Don't wake up and look over at me and go, God, he's still alive.
Right.
He's still there.
Right. Too bad. It's, you know, it's a pretty hard way to go through life, you know, and so I'm not saying you magically wake up and say that I love running, but I would point out to people like you and you, because you and I are talking. So Brandon may not love running, but Brandon absolutely, just from talking to you and whatever, I know that you would love the results of running. So if I just asked you, would you like to have the benefits of running? And the benefits are, you know, better physical fitness, you know, you're out in nature, you sleep better, you probably have better sex, you like everything in life actually can be better if you're physically more healthy and you're emotionally, you know, running it also benefits your mind. Like you would want those benefits, right?
I'm checking the box on all those.
Right. And so it's not running. I mean, it's the physical act of running though that is uncomfortable. Therefore, we are like programmed to not like it because we don't like to be uncomfortable. And so what I tell people all the time is you have to find a way to approach something without fear, or without letting fear be the dominant thing. Have an open heart and a curious mind towards the experience, and understand that physical discomfort is going to end. Like when you go doing that 6 hours, you're looking at the clock. You know it's going to end.
Right.
So I also, not to be too dramatic, but I also remind people, you know, to think about other people whose suffering doesn't end. You know, you think about those people who don't have a clean drink of water, who are somehow imprisoned or against their will, or whatever. There's tons of suffering out there in the world that is involuntary. And we are very, very lucky to be in a place where we get to experience voluntary suffering that we do by choice in order to gain knowledge and have an experience. And so try to be open to that experience and not turn it into something terrible, but look at it as this incredible opportunity at self-growth.
And you did that. You know, you had an awful opportunity or event to where, and you talk about it in the book, you know, where you went to federal prison over pardon my language, but bullshit. I mean, can you tell us that story? It was. Can you tell us that story?
Yeah, well, you know, and so I do this, you know, I do this crazy long run across the Sahara Desert where I become the first person with a couple of teammates to ever run all the way across the Sahara Desert. And that was 2 marathons a day for 111 consecutive days. And
let that soak in for people at home. Just let that soak in.
Yeah. I who knew Africa was that big? I needed to check the maps better, basically. But you know, I did this really long run, and I became, you know, well known in the running community and even beyond. I was on the Jay Leno show and the morning shows, and I co-founded a nonprofit called Water.org with Matt Damon, and today it's the biggest clean water nonprofit in the world. And you know, all these good things happened to me, and this now sober person. And but it also brought some attention that, frankly was unwanted. And one particular IRS agent decided he was going to look at my taxes and see if, basically if I was hiding money or something. And I'll never probably know what his real motivation was.
Right.
It's never going to be clear, and I don't want to debate, the right or wrong of it, here, because I think, from the things you've read, you can take my word or not that this was an unfair situation and something I did not deserve. And I'm a person that would admit, after all those years of sobriety, if I screwed up, I had learned to step up and say, okay,
Yeah,
I made a mistake. Yeah, I own it. I'm a far from perfect person, and I exemplify that every day practically.
Yeah.
But in that case, this was not something I had done yet. This particular person decided to pursue it, and long story short, I became the only person in the U.S., the only borrower in the real estate industry, just a regular person like anybody else listening to this, not a real estate expert, became the only person to actually be charged with overstating my income on a home loan application from back in 2005, back when if you had a pulse, you could get a loan, and I had a great credit score. I had a good history. I didn't falsify paperwork. I didn't do anything. I had a mortgage broker that put some false information on a loan application without my knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And we actually proved all of this at trial, because I was indicted by the feds, and I went to trial and I fought this thing. And interestingly, I was ultimately found, I don't even know if I do a good job of explaining this in the book, but I was found not guilty of providing false information.
Right.
But through a quirk kind of in the law, I was found guilty of mail fraud, because I did, in fact, sign a closing package. And for anybody who's bought a house or a car, you understand you get presented with a big stack of papers. You sign them where the red sticky notes are, and you turn them back in. And in my case, that meant that I mailed them to my attorney. And that because there was false information in there, whether I put it there or not, that ended up being mail fraud, because false information was transmitted through the mail. So anyway, that's it for that part of the story. I fight this thing, and I'm found guilty of mail fraud, and I get sentenced. So here I am, 19 years clean and sober. I think I've done some pretty good things in my life up to that point. And whether it's atonement or anything else, I'm now sentenced to 21 months in federal prison in Beckley, West Virginia. And I report to prison on Valentine's Day, 2011. And, and I'm scared, and I'm frustrated, and I'm angry when I report to prison. Like, my teenage sons, who need me desperately at this point in their lives, are dropping me off in the front of a federal prison on this day, and I'm kissing and hugging them and saying goodbye and stepping into an unknown world. And and so more than anything, I was angry. But it took me about 2 days to figure out that I was not going to get through this experience if I stayed angry and bitter. Fair or unfair didn't matter anymore. I was in prison, and that was not going to change. And I had to figure out who I was going to be in this situation. And, I did what I always do, man. I started running. I basically just started running, and guys thought I was crazy. Every time I got out in the rec yard, I would run. And if we were on lockdown and I couldn't go outside, I ran in my cell, and I did that sometimes for 4 hours or 6 hours at a time.
Did someone mail you like the amount of steps you running in stride in your cell?
They did. Yeah. Yep. I figured out through a friend of mine. Right. I figured out through a friend of mine how far I was running in place. And I wrote a blog actually called Running in Place. And that was cathartic for me also. I would write every day. And I read 150 books while I was in prison. And I just what I did was basically embrace the situation. And I said it to you a moment ago, that just like with running, I had to approach this situation with a curious heart and an open mind and see what was going to come out of it, and not expect that it was going to be bad, but that it was going to be whatever I was going to make of it. That's what it was going to be. And, again, I mentioned the laws of attraction rather than promotion. It would not have been a good idea to walk up to like some fat guy in prison and say, "Hey man, you look like you could lose a few pounds. Why don't you come out and run with me?"
Mm-hmm.
That's not a
That's
good,
probably
that's
not
not
a
a
great
good,
idea.
no, that's not a good plan for prison. But what happened is initially guys made fun of me. They like, because that's the way men are, boys too. They pick on things they kind of don't understand. But I
Right.
just kept running every day, and people saw my life actually being good. My mental health was good. I was fit and healthy. I looked good. I was making the most of the situation and whatever that meant. And guys started to come up to me and say, "Hey, could you help me learn how to run?" And when I got to prison, I basically had, there were like 3 guys that were running regularly. And by the time I left 18 months later, I had 50 guys in my running group. And I was doing yoga with them 3 days a week out on the softball field. And, in the federal system, there's no addiction recovery, which is just crazy, because 85% of the people in prison are there because of drug problems. And yet there's no addiction recovery. There's a drug education program
Mm-hmm.
that basically amounts to this. If you want to know where your tax dollars are going, it basically amounts to this. You are a piece of shit. You are a burden to your family and to society. Don't do drugs. Like, that's
Wow.
what the drug education program boils down to. So nobody leaves prison better than they got there from that standpoint. And, that's a topic for another day. But,
Sure.
if people want to, the tough on crime people, I always say to them, first of all, guy gets out of prison, he's been there for 10 years, and maybe he went in as a 20-year-old, he gets out at 30. Like, who do you want as your neighbor? Do you want somebody who actually like finished college in prison and learned a skill and can get a job?
Right.
Like, and people complain about, well, I'm not giving, those inmates don't deserve those opportunities. Okay, well, now what? So now they're out of prison at 30. They can't get a job. They're a felon. The odds of them, going back to prison or staying on the public dole for the rest of their lives
Right.
is almost 100%. So by not giving them opportunities while they're in prison, you basically are dooming the taxpayers to pay for them for the rest of their lives. And personally, I don't want to do that. It's,
Right.
I want that guy to get a job. Anyway, I know I'm getting off track, but the
No,
fact is,
but it's all important. But this is you're
it
speaking from
is.
firsthand experience. This isn't something we saw on Dr. Phil or a documentary. This is you. This is your
Yep.
documentary. You saw it. No one can tell the story better than you, and that's why I said in the very
Well, people
beginning
thanked
of the
me,
show.
Brandon. People thanked me when I left prison. I had guys coming up to me in tears saying, "Thank you so much for all that you did for me." And I was like baffled, because I just looked back at them and said, "You don't understand. You got me through this experience." Because there's another piece to this, right? Where there's an old saying that I love, and I don't know if it's an AA saying. I think it's just whatever. Maybe I made it up. Who knows? Maybe I'll take credit for it. But to keep it, you have to give it away. And I want that to just like soak in for a second. To keep it, you have to give it. So whatever it is that you have, whatever your gift is, your passion is, your thing that you're good at, that you understand, you have a responsibility. Okay, I shouldn't say you. I have a responsibility to give that to other people.
Mm-hmm.
So what I did in prison was to give people the passion of running and of not being a drug addict and of all these other things. And in giving them that, I was allowed to keep it for another day or year, or hopefully for the rest of my life. And so just like doing this podcast, I'm not doing anything for you today. You might think I am, and maybe even the listeners think I am. But I'm doing this because I've gained an understanding of the more often I talk about this stuff and the more I can share my experience, which is mine alone, the more likely that is to keep me sober. It may or may not affect someone else out there. There might be somebody out there saying, screw this guy, I'm going to get drunk. You know, he's a dumbass. And that's just, I can't control the outcome of anything. All I can control is my input and my effort. And that's what I'm here to do.
I'll tell you that you were talking about the inmates coming up to you and giving you a hug and, with tearful eyes and thanking you. I know this is to be true with the positive influence that you were and such a ray of motivation and hope for them. And I know this because Pick and Roll told me.
Yeah.
Because, do you remember Pick and Roll?
I remember Pick and Roll very well. And
so I actually spoke with him. I actually talked to him. Believe it or not, I called and spoke with him. You're kidding me. Nope. Surprise! I called. So can I share a story with you?
Please.
Okay. So a friend of mine.
I'm astounded.
So good. This was my surprise I had for you. So a friend of mine who did a bit up at Beckley, West Virginia for drugs is a good friend of mine. I called him and I was like, "Hey man, I'm doing a show and I have a guy coming on. He's a middle-aged white guy. He did some time up in Beckley, West Virginia. He was a runner. Do you know him?" He was like, "No, man, I got out in 09. And I was like, "Damn, I thought it would be so cool to talk to someone who knew you in a different time, in your life and could speak to, like, I knew Charlie when he was, behind the fence, because I don't know if anyone's ever done that before. So he was like, nah, I wasn't there. I left in 09. I was like, well, damn, I know he had mentioned somewhere along the way about a guy named Pick and Roll, and he just stopped and he goes, Pick? And I said, no, but Charlie mentioned him. He goes, I'll call him right now. So he three-wayed me and Pick and Roll. And I got to talk to him, God. and he wanted me to tell you that Charlie told me that I can walk as far as he can run. That you pointed one time, you pointed and said, you can walk as far as I can point and I can run. The difference is we're both going to get there, but I might get there just a little bit faster. But at some point, we're both going to stop and walk. And he said he never forgot that, and he wanted me to tell you too, for you not to forget, you only live 15 minutes away from Airport Road.
Yeah, that is crazy. Well, I need to be in touch with Pick and Roll. That is that gave me goosebumps and tears and everything else. And he, like I said in the book, he's the guy who showed me around, and he was kind to me and in a very scary situation. And I think I say in the book, one of the funniest things he ever said to me was, he looked at me and he said, how much time you got, Engle? Well, first he said, what's your bid? And I didn't know what the hell he was talking about. But ultimately what he meant was, how long are you going to be here? And I said 21 months. And he just looks at me, cocks his head, and he's like, shit, you ain't even got time to unpack your bags.
He told me that. He told me the same thing. And he told me about you running your 150 miles or Badwater while you were in there, and what an inspiration you were to the inmates. And the warden was, new, but you could do it. But I had a good conversation with him. But when we go offline here, I'll send you his contact information, because he did say that he thinks about you often. He always wonders how you're doing. But your impact on him and even the others was positive, and you probably don't know how much you meant to them. So I wanted to be able to share that with you today.
Well, I got to tell you, dude, that is one of the most amazing things, and I thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing that. And it's the weirdest thing, prison's strange, because I always say to people, imagine like going to high school, and then when you graduate, you never get to talk to anybody ever again that you went to high school with. Like, you can't imagine that, right? And yet that's kind of how prison is, because in the years after you get out, you're on what's called supervised release, which is basically probation. So, you're not allowed to have any contact with other people. So I was different. I was only there for 18 months. You got guys like Pick and Roll who were there for, I don't even know, 15 or 20 years.
20 years.
Like, yeah, every person he ever knew anymore was pretty much in prison. His best friends in the world were guys that he served with in prison. And so how do you then get out and they're your support network, and now you can't talk to them? And
it's so funny you mentioned
it's just, it makes no sense.
Well, it's so funny that you say that, because the two, my friends Skeet and Pick and Roll, they still stay in contact, and they both told me, the world is such a funny place, right? I mean, I'm sitting here talking to these two guys who've been in Beckley, West Virginia, about you and this show, and I'm a little guy from nowhere, Statesville. It was almost like a real surreal moment. I hate that word. But they were saying how they're a brotherhood, the guys who've been in prison together, and they're more like a family because they spent so much time together than their actually biological family, because there's things that they don't understand, and there's just a closeness there. And so when these two come through town, because Pick and Roll lives just outside of Beckley, about 15 miles, I think he said, of Beckley, West Virginia. But they still stop and see each other, and they talk once a week on the phone. And I guess there's a group of those guys that have found one another, and they still, have conversations and go to dinner when they can.
Yeah. I mean, and that's it's a big deal. And I am after all these years in touch with one or two people from back then. But again, Pick and Roll was a very impactful guy for me, and I'm super excited. This is like wait, what's that? I don't remember the name of that TV show. This Is Your Life. When people start coming out from the curtain. And Charlie, do you remember your first grade teacher, Mrs. Johnson? Taught you how to tie your shoes.
That's better than saying, I feel like I'm on an episode of Punk'd. Right,
exactly.
Going to jump out. So I know
Pick and Roll taught me how to work the system too, which is very funny. I always make the joke, I was a vegetarian in a very meat centric place. And so I learned how to basically trade and hamburgers and all that kind of stuff for vegetables and fruit. And, I think I said it in the book, my joke was, for a while I became known as the grapefruit godfather. And, because I basically just, every time we had grapefruit day, I collected like 25 grapefruits and I'd make juice. Anyway, Pick and Roll, there's an economy that happens in prison, and there's an honesty that actually happens in prison that you don't find out in the real world. I'm not saying there's not, scoundrels, bad people in there, and you don't want to trust people too much, but the fact of the matter is it's a pretty honorable place in general, and it has a way of, if you're a good person, you'll get through it just fine. And if you're not, you do have a chance to have some rotten things happen to you. So,
well, I know that we're running out of time here. I wanted to talk real quick about your newest adventure, 5.8, and what you're also doing with Spartan Trail. If we could do that for a moment.
Yeah, I mean, I have so many cool things going on right now that I'm excited about. And, one of them is, as you mentioned, Spartan. I've known Joe DeSena, who's the founder of Spartan, for over 20 years. We were adventure race teammates back in the 90s, and he approached me a couple of years ago and asked if I'd be interested in starting to do a trail series, basically a series of trail runs in conjunction with the Spartan obstacle course races that are going on. And I said yes, of course. And so this year we just launched this series, and we started with Seattle recently, and my next race is in Austin, Texas, and then I've got there is one in Asheville coming up in July for people that want to know that, a trail race that'll happen. So Spartan Trail Asheville, you can find online. There is also one, interestingly, in West Virginia where I did my time. So I'm hoping they let me back into the state without any trouble. And then I hope they let me leave again.
More importantly.
Yeah. So, there's some cool events coming up with Spartan, But Spartan has also become a sponsor partner of mine for this big project of mine, which is called 5.8. And 5.8 is my next big adventure. And that is that I am going to go from the lowest place on all 7 continents to the highest point on each continent. And, the first adventure is Africa coming up later this year, where I'll go from the lowest land elevation on the coast in East Africa all the way across Ethiopia and Kenya and Tanzania up to the top of Kilimanjaro. And that'll be about 1,600 miles. But then I'll do that in South America, and then I'll do it in North America, and then I'll do it in Antarctica, and ultimately it ends in Asia, where I will go from the Dead Sea, which is the lowest land elevation on the planet, to the top of Mount Everest, which, as everybody knows, is the highest point on the planet. And that's about 4,500 miles across a lot of really amazing terrain. But I call the project 5.8 because it's actually only 5.8 vertical miles. So if you can envision that it's 4,500 miles from point to point, but looking straight up and down, it's only 5.8 miles from the lowest to highest. And everybody, you and me and everybody on this planet lives in this 5.8 mile little sliver of atmosphere. And I am launching a new nonprofit called green.org. And, we are all stewards of this planet, and we need to do a better job of taking care of it.
We're all in this together in that 5.8
we
space.
Are. Yeah, that is it. I mean, seriously, it's just, it's a 5.8 mile space. And look, here's the other thing too. We see, human suffering and environmental devastation every single day on TV and all over the place. And it means a lot to me, and it's important, but my plan is we see enough of that. And my plan is to actually show people, this beautiful 5.8 miles where we all live. And, I do think that there are steps we can take. I think that, addiction recovery fits into this package too. I think that, talking about the importance of getting out there and doing things that challenge you and that will not just be comfortable. Like I always make the joke, like when did life's goals becoming trying to find a way to make life easier? Life is not going to be easy. It's just not. I don't care how hard you try. There's going to be hard things that come up. Some of them are self-inflicted. Some of them are just like, they just happen to us without any input from us. But if you can approach all of those things with, as I keep saying, with an open heart and a curious mind, then you'll find a way to make something positive out of it. And, I don't know what's going to happen with this 5.8 series. I have no idea exactly, who I will be and what I hope to get out of it. But I know that if I challenge myself and I go do something big, I will learn something from it.
Are you going to be running this solo, or will you have teammates competing at the entire time, or maybe certain people will do one challenge and then another do a separate challenge and that sort of thing?
Wow, that's a great question, because I do have a partner in this one, because otherwise I'm just stuck talking to myself all the time. And, and his name is Andre Kylik. And Andre is a fascinating guy himself. I wrote a big feature article for Runner's World Magazine about Andre years ago. And I always lead with this, and that is that Andre has no legs. Andre lost both his legs in a terrible accident when he was in his 20s. He got drunk one day, and he was in Prague, where he was studying in college, and he actually left a train platform and got run over by 5 train cars. And Andre's story is amazing, and one of determination and resilience. And he's gone on to be a world champion, a Hawaii Ironman athlete. He's done some incredible things physically. And so like this isn't a story of an able-bodied person helping a disabled guy do things. This is just going to be two buddies out there doing cool things together. And when the world gets to really meet Andre, they're going to be shocked. Like, he's just an incredible guy. So, yeah. So, I mean, it's going to be an amazing experience and everything. I think we will have people come out and join us. You know, some people will come climb Mount Kilimanjaro with us. And, you know, I'm actually talking to TV producers, and there's talk of doing this in a way where we bring people out to do a portion of the adventure in order to, like, find redemption, you know, to find, you know, maybe it's a person who needs to get sober. Maybe it's a person who lost a loved one to cancer or addiction or something else, and they've lost their own way, and they need to find that spark in life again. But so we're still kind of working on that idea, but my hope is that at a very minimum, people will follow along with us as we take on these journeys. And you can always go to my website, which is just charlieengle.com, and I can send you a couple of these links to post in your show notes if you want.
Absolutely.
And, you know, 5.8, it's the number 5, it's the word point, the number 8, and the word project. 5.8project.org is a way to find us also, and .com. So, but I'll send you all that and you can post it. And man, at a very minimum, we'd love to have people follow along with us. You know, at the maximum, they can contribute either financially or in some other way, or maybe, you know, for those few people who want to really change their lives, they can come out and join us.
Well, that's fantastic. Yeah, please send me all that, and we'll be. I'll do everything I can here on, you know, with my little spot here to help support, promote, and bring awareness to, and to keep everybody aware. And I'll be thinking about you during this and cheering you on when you're there struggling and finding that pain of suffer, but you'll drive through it. And one last random question before we jump off here. So I vacation at Sunset Beach all the time, and in your book you mentioned you lived there, had a vacation home or investment properties and whatnot. Where at in Sunset Beach was that at?
Yeah, man, I was on 3rd in Sunset Beach. So and so I had a little house about 6 rows back from you know, oceanfront, and
just across the bridge.
I owned
Exactly.
Yeah, so I was across the beach over, right. No, it's a big bridge now. Back when I owned it, it was the old swing bridge. And and Sunset Beach is still, like, you know, God, I love that place. And I haven't been for years now, but it's the best memories. And it's you know, it's a place I'm sorry that I don't still own because it's not for money or anything else. It's just a beautiful, you know, it's a beautiful place, and I wish we still had it, but it holds a great place in my heart and always will.
Yeah,
so.
Same here. My grandparents have owned a few places there on the other side of the bridge. Back where there's that little trailer, little few rows where there's little mobile homes. My grandpa's owned few of them through there, and he recently bought a townhome over there on High Market where there's the food line and the subway.
Sure.
But we just had to sell it because unfortunately he's back here with Alzheimer's. But that's but Sunset
happens.
Beach is a beautiful little patch of heaven. And when I read that in the book, I was like, not a lot of people really know about Sunset. So I thought that was cool.
No, don't tell them, man.
Well, Charlie, thank you so much for everything today and the inspiration and sharing your stories. And I hope if there's anyone out there listening, this helps you or a family member. And just remember, if someone out there is battling through this, that there's people out there who care about you and love you, and there is light at the end of the tunnel. And for the family members, be a little bit more patient, be a little bit more warm, maybe be a little more soft, and hold those hugs just a little bit longer. So
well said, my friend. Thank you for having me.
Hey, we appreciate it, Charlie, and we'll stay in touch, and I'll send you Pick and Roll's contact, and send me all the contact information for your stuff, and I appreciate you.
All right, brother. Thank you. Take care. We'll talk to you soon.
All right, buddy. Thanks. See you, everybody.
Bye.